You open the package the same way you always do, tearing the seal without looking because your hands already know the motion. You tilt it slightly, expecting the familiar pull in your wrist, but the pull never comes. The box lifts too easily, like it's already been used. You pause, glance inside, and tell yourself nothing is wrong because the label looks unchanged. You pour it out anyway. The contents spread across the counter and stop early, leaving bare space where there should be more. For a moment, you blame yourself. Maybe you misremembered. Maybe last week you scooped heavier. Then you feel the silence of the kitchen press in as the realization settles into your shoulders. This is the first opening, the first pour, and it's already smaller. The price you paid didn't move, but the moment ended sooner than expected. You fold the empty air inside the box with your fingers, feeling absence instead of weight. The routine you trusted breaks quietly, without announcement. The loss doesn't arrive once. It repeats every time you reach for the same amount. Later, under bright store lights, your cart rolls down the aisle you know by heart. Your eyes skim shelves on autopilot, guided by memory instead of labels. You lift the usual items and feel them rise faster than they should, but you ignore it because the numbers below haven't changed. You tell yourself consistency means safety. At checkout, the receipt looks familiar enough to relax your grip. Back home, you line everything up on the counter and notice the spread looks thinner, like a week compressed into fewer days. You stop and stare, replaying past routines to reconcile the difference. The contradiction presses in slowly. If the same choices now fill less space, you'll return sooner. Returning sooner means rearranging evenings, cutting into time that used to belong to rest or family. You open a cabinet and see gaps where backups once waited, and your chest tightens as you realize the margin is gone. The store didn't announce a change, but your schedule already feels tighter. What vanished from the shelf quietly begins to dictate how often your days restart. That night, you open the cabinet above the counter and freeze. The shelf where extra boxes used to sit is bare, showing the wall behind it like something removed without notice. You believed keeping backups meant stability, proof you were staying ahead of everyday needs. The contradiction settles in when you realize nothing unusual happened this week. You didn't overuse anything. You didn't skip a trip. The space is empty because the same items now finish sooner. You close the cabinet and hear the soft click echo longer than it should. Dinner feels different as portions stretch and conversation shortens. Attention drifting toward what might run out next. You calculate days instead of meals, watching the clock glow while you measure without numbers. The next evening arrives faster than expected, and the same quiet adjustment repeats. Evenings compress into planning, and planning steals time from rest. You didn't choose to renegotiate daily life. It was renegotiated for you. Identity shifts as providing turns into rationing, not by decision, but by necessity. Autonomy thins when every choice carries a countdown. The house feels smaller, rooms tightening around routines that end early. What once felt like preparation now feels like exposure, because margins disappear without warning. Preparedness turns into pressure when finishing early becomes the new normal. The pattern shows itself again during cleanup. Containers stack lower in the sink, leaving gaps that water can't hide. You believed prices were the honest signal, the line that told you when things changed. The contradiction appears when sameness demands more effort. You wash, refill, reorganize sooner than planned, repeating motions that used to fade into the background. Minutes drain while the tap runs, and those minutes attach themselves to stress. You rush a store run between obligations, scanning shelves quickly, trusting labels while your hands feel the difference. Back home, you build small systems to compensate, shifting items, tracking usage, tightening routines. Those systems demand attention, pulling focus from people nearby. A conversation pauses while you check another container, and the pause lingers. Time once shared becomes segmented by shortages you didn't authorize. Fatigue smooths resistance, making faster cycles feel acceptable. Choice narrows not through force, but through repetition that wears you down quietly. The house adapts before you do, training compliance through chores that never finish. Nothing announces the shift. It advances through ordinary evenings. What drains you isn't one chore, but endless resets that quietly claim your time. You start noticing the change outside the kitchen, where routines are supposed to be automatic. In the laundry room, you twist the detergent cap and feel the bottle tilt too fast, the weight shifting in your hand as if it's already near empty. You believe these supplies were background noise, steady supports that didn't require thought. The contradiction lands when support becomes fragile. The same load of clothes now consumes more of the bottle, or the bottle simply ends sooner. And either way, you are forced to adjust. You pour more carefully, watching the stream, hesitating as if restraint can stretch time. The cap clicks back on and you set it down with a small irritation you can't fully name. A week later, you're back in the same spot, holding another bottle that should have lasted longer. That early ending pushes errands into gaps between obligations. You stop on the way home, walk another aisle, stand in another line, swipe again, carry again. Time leaks in pieces, not dramatic, just persistent, stealing minutes that never return. Autonomy thins when maintenance becomes strategy. You begin delaying washes, choosing which clothes can wait, turning household life into scheduling. The pressure spreads into identity, because you believed being organized meant staying ahead. Now being organized means constantly compensating. The compensation is quiet, but it shapes you. You scan shelves differently, suspicious of sameness, comparing containers that promise stability while your hands remember a heavier past. Trust thins. You second-guess purchases, then second-guess yourself for second-guessing. The pause becomes habit. That habit follows you into meals, into budgeting, into how you plan weekends. Even relationships absorb the friction when fatigue rises without a visible cause. A request sounds sharper. A delay feels heavier. You realize the loss isn't only money, it's rhythm. The rhythm keeps accelerating, shortening cycles, demanding attention. You are always resetting instead of settling. You adapt because the alternative is falling behind, and falling behind feels like failure. Expectations shrink alongside packaging, training patience downward. You didn't decide to accept less. You were trained through repetition. Each refill is a reminder that what you relied on no longer lasts. The house feels closer, schedules feel tighter, and your attention fragments across small maintenance tasks. Endurance replaces ease, and the cycle keeps pulling you forward, faster, with no signal to stop. What wears you down isn't one empty bottle, but endless refills that steal control slowly. Over time, you stop being surprised. The lighter feel becomes expected, almost normal, and that expectation settles into your hands. You believed noticing would protect you, that awareness alone could restore balance. The contradiction arrives when recognition changes nothing. You still return sooner. You still adjust portions. You still plan around absence. Awareness adds weight without relief. You open a cabinet and immediately calculate how long things will last. A habit that sticks. That habit follows you into other decisions, teaching caution where comfort used to live. Time loss blends with autonomy loss as vigilance becomes routine. You spend minutes anticipating shortages before they happen, and those minutes multiply across days. Relationships feel the shift when attention stays occupied by logistics. A shared moment pauses because you are tracking consumption in the background. The body responds with tight shoulders and shallow breaths, a quiet readiness for the next adjustment. You tell yourself this is responsible, but responsibility feels heavier than before. Fatigue smooths resistance, making faster cycles feel acceptable. What once felt temporary now feels permanent. Normal becomes defined by constant recalculation. Comfort shrinks as expectation lowers. The house teaches you to move quickly, use sparingly, return often. That lesson embeds itself in behavior, shaping how you live beyond the shelf. The loss isn't loud, but it's persistent, pressing gently until posture changes. The cycle completes itself when vigilance feels natural. The cycle wins when constant adjustment becomes normal and you stop expecting fullness. Eventually, the pattern stops feeling like an interruption and starts feeling like the rules of the room. You reach for less without thinking, adjusting habits before the shortage even appears. You believed restraint was a choice, something you applied deliberately when circumstances demanded it. The contradiction shows up when restraint arrives uninvited. Your hand pauses before pouring. The scoop hovers, then pulls back on instinct. That hesitation spreads quietly into other corners of life, teaching caution as default. Autonomy thins when behavior changes ahead of conscious decision. You hear yourself explaining smaller portions, fewer backups, shorter runs as normal to others. The explanation sounds calm, but something inside resists. Time loss compounds because every task now carries a buffer for running out. You schedule around absence instead of presence. Relationships adapt as expectations shrink to avoid friction. Plans become lighter, simpler, easier to maintain under constant adjustment. Identity bends as having enough turns into managing without. You don't feel robbed, you feel trained. Trained to accept less without protest. Trained to compensate silently. Trained to keep life moving despite erosion. The house feels orderly, but the order is built on vigilance. Rest feels conditional because maintenance never finishes. Even when shelves look full, trust is gone. You know fullness won't last. That knowledge shapes posture, pace, and patience. You didn't agree to this discipline, but you practice it daily. The narrowing doesn't announce itself. It embeds into routine. What changes isn't the price, but how much of yourself you now hold back. Nothing dramatic happens. No warning sounds. The label stays the same. The receipt stays the same. What changes is how quickly things end and how often you return. You believed sameness meant stability. The contradiction lives in the gap between what's promised and what's left. That gap becomes routine. The routine becomes behavior. The behavior becomes normal. The house teaches you to expect less, use less, and settle faster. Not once, but continuously. This is how the reduction holds, through repetition that feels ordinary enough to accept. Shrinkflation. Top of form. Bottom of form.